Let's start our neurology section off with some pathophys. Our nervous system is huge, it's complex, but we're going to break it down into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system, we've got your brain, your spinal cord, spinal nerves coming off of that into the peripheral nervous system, where we get into our autonomic system, think our parasympathetic and our sympathetic system, all the way down to our sensory nerves. So what's happening in our nervous system? Well, we've got all of our neurons, we've got all these synapses in between our neurons. They don't actually connect. There's a little bit of space in between them, and that's where we get our neurotransmitters. They kind of squirt out one side, activate the other side of that synapse, and our neurotransmitters are our form of communication, and our action potentials are transmitted through our axons. So these nerve axons, these insulated kind of wires going in between all of our neurons, and then we get our communication through our neurotransmitters. So what are neurotransmitters? So let's focus on our central nervous system and our neurotransmitters here. Well, we've got chemical signaling. So if you think neurotransmitter, think communication between our neurons. So these synapses are the spaces in between our neurons, in between those nerve cells. There's no actual physical connection there, and our neurotransmitters act as the little communicators from one neuron to the other. Our major neurotransmitters, we've got some chemical neurotransmitters. On the parasympathetic side, we've got acetylcholine, which is our large one. On our sympathetic side, we think norepinephrine. Once we get into the central nervous system, we're thinking dopamine, serotonin, histamines, and even opioid peptide. And then we even have amino acids that act as neurotransmitters, as those little communicators. The big one that we'll be talking about is GABA. Then there's also glutamate, glycine, taurine, all these other amino acids that act as communicators. The big ones that we'll be paying attention to are the glutamate and GABA. So let's focus on some specific neurotransmitters that are going to be important for our practice. First one we'll talk about, norepinephrine. One of these nervous system neurotransmitters activating both alpha and beta receptors, your alpha 1s, your alpha 2s, beta 1s, beta 2s. When we get down into the function of norepinephrine and its role in the nervous system itself, thinking regulation-wise, cerebellar function, even learning and memory and mood processing are roles that norepi takes. Our next one is dopamine. There are 5 receptor subtypes of dopamine. We will not get into the 5 subtypes. We're just going to talk about dopamine as a neurotransmitter in and of itself. Again, dopamine has much to do with mood, even motor coordination, and hormone release from your other glands. Then we have serotonin. Serotonin binds to 5-HT receptors. So anytime you hear 5-HT anything, think serotonin. Serotonin has large effects on emotional processing, mood, and then even effects on sleep and appetite. Then there's histamine. We usually think about histamine and allergic reactions, but histamine is one of our neurotransmitters in the nervous system. Binds to, histamine receptors. And this histamine has effects, just like you'd think. Giving Benadryl, it's got effects on sleep and sedation. Alright, now let's focus in on the autonomic system. The autonomic system is in control of our involuntary organ control. You're not thinking about your heart beating, it's just doing it. You're not thinking about digestion, you're just doing it. So controlling smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, controlling your glands. So everything in your body that you're not thinking about is being controlled by your autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic system is categorized into 2 flavors, your parasympathetic and your sympathetic side. So your sympathetic side is your fight or flight response, where your heart rate accelerates, your GI activity goes down, your pupils dilate. You're ready to fight, or you're ready to flee. All right. On your parasympathetic side, that's your rest and digest. Your GI activity goes up. Heart rate goes down a little bit. You're ready to rest. You're ready to kick back. You're not in that fight or flight state. You're in a more relaxed state. So that autonomic system, we've got our parasympathetic side, we've got our sympathetic side. They're usually working in unison with each other, but there are certain times where one is working a little extra than the other. When it comes to neurotransmitters, we've got two major players here. On the autonomic side, we've got acetylcholine for that parasympathetic side, and we've got norepi for our sympathetic side. And here, just a little bit of terminology. When we think parasympathetic, we think acetylcholine, and when we think parasympathetic, the word cholinergic is used. So if you hear anything cholinergic or anticholinergic, that has to do with the parasympathetic side. On the other side of that coin, you think sympathetic, you think norepinephrine. The word used there is adrenergic. So if you hear anything use adrenergic, we are talking about the sympathetic side. Now let's start off talking about the cholinergic side. And remember, cholinergic has to do with the parasympathetic side of things. And our cholinergic receptors stimulated by acetylcholine on our parasympathetic side. And we've got a couple cholinergic receptors. We've got nicotinic receptors and muscarinic receptors. Nicotinic receptors respond to nicotine, and muscarinic receptors respond to muscarine as their neurotransmitter. Both receptors respond to acetylcholine. So muscarine fits perfectly in there, you see, with muscarinic receptors. But acetylcholine also binds in there. It doesn't bind perfectly in there, but enough to stimulate. And then that nicotine, if it's trying to bind to a muscarinic receptor there on the top, it's not going to fit. It's not going to stimulate that muscarinic receptor. Same thing with the nicotinics. Acetylcholine is still going to bind. It's still going to stimulate the nicotinic receptors, just not perfectly and not completely, like nicotine will with nicotinic receptors. Excuse me. So we see here that acetylcholine will bind to both nicotinic receptors and muscarinic receptors, and then muscarine will bind to muscarinic receptors. Nicotine will bind to nicotinic receptors. We can also block these receptors, like atropine. Atropine is an anticholinergic. It'll block muscarinic receptors, creating its effects. Curare, which is a paralytic, think of succinylcholine or vecuronium. So curare will block nicotinic receptors and creating its effects. So each receptor has its own neurotransmitter, but the overarching neurotransmitter right here is acetylcholine, which can bind to both. So what's happening in these synapses in between nerve endings, right? We've got these neurotransmitters being released. Here we've got acetylcholine, go to and bind to muscarinic receptors. Muscarinic receptors primarily in your GI system, in your organs, in your glands. Your nicotinic receptors primarily in your skeletal muscle. So we can go ahead and bind to one or both of those. We can block those. And with acetylcholine here in the synaptic space, we have what's called acetylcholine esterase, which breaks down acetylcholine. It inactivates acetylcholine. That becomes important when we start talking about anticholinergic drugs. And that's important because our cholinergic drugs, we can either increase acetylcholine, or we can inhibit that acetylcholine esterase, which in effect leaves more acetylcholine there in that synaptic space to bind to receptors. From the cholinergic side, let's jump over to the adrenergic side. So our sympathetic side, our adrenergic fight or flight, four primary receptors to focus on here: alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1. Beta 2, we know that if we stimulate alpha 1, we get vasoconstriction, that's smooth muscle contraction. Beta 1 effects on the heart. Beta 2 effects are effects on smooth muscle, especially bronchodilation. and bronchial effects. And from there, we can see that we've got a whole lot of medications there that deal with alphas and betas. Right? We can either stimulate alpha, we can block alpha, we can stimulate betas, we can block betas, beta 1, beta 2s, alpha 1s, alpha 2s. We can just block that adrenergic site altogether. So we've got a lot of medications that are both prescription and on the ambulance with us that act on these alphas and betas. That's our quick nervous system overview, neurology overview. So if you have any questions, send them our way.